If you've been following the lectionary readings this week, you will know that it's been following the story of Abram and how God had spoken to Abram and promised that he would be the father of many and that his descendants would be like the stars in the sky. And you would know too that Abram said, but how do I know this, Lord? And there was that curious ritual when he set out that the halves of the animals and God walked through them. And it was a covenant. And it was a sign of God's promise that he was going to do what he said he would do. And today's lectionary reading is a step on in that story. So I'm going to read from Genesis chapter 16, and it will be on the screen. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. But she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar, so she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said, so after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "Your servant is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai ill-treated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from? Where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai," she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now with child, and you will have a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility towards all his brothers." She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." Don't you just love Scripture? So real, isn't it? So reflective of the pickles that we find ourselves in life. And my goodness, this is a bit of a pickle, isn't it? So the story had begun a few chapters previously when God had promised that child that would begin the numerous descendants. But they'd been living in the land of Canaan for 10 years, no child. And they're over 80. So you can understand, both of them, over 80. You can understand, can't you, them getting a bit anxious and thinking, maybe the Lord needs a bit of help here. Ever been tempted to do that? Let's give the Lord a bit of help here because he's not quite able to do it without me because it's clear we haven't had a baby yet. So he needs a bit of assistance. So Sarai has an idea. And she says to Abram, "I'll give you my servant Hagar. You sleep with her. She'll have a child, and we'll have that child and build on God's promises through that child." Good plan, isn't it? Abram says yes, and it happens, and then it begins to go wrong. Hagar gets pregnant. They must have rejoiced initially, but oh my, how it then went wrong. And I wonder whether the good relationships between Abram and Sarai and Hagar begin to deteriorate, all of them. And so the home that once perhaps was a happy home is no longer. And lots of people are affected by this. And knowing she is pregnant, Hagar despises Sarai. And as I was reading about this, one of the suggestions was that maybe it was because Hagar was beginning to feel a superiority, because she had managed to do what Sarai could not. And Sarai blames Abram. It's what happens, isn't it? She blames him. He says, you sort it out, it's your problem. And Sarah takes it out on Hagar, and she runs away. You may not have had that same circumstance in your life, but I bet we've all known the pickles, the chaos that we get into when we go before the Lord, when he's promised us something and it hasn't come, and we get tired of waiting and we think, I know, let's get this ball rolling. It's a strange concept to us, but as I was reading around it yesterday, there is a custom in these times that we are not so familiar with. So the whole thing looks alien to us. But there was a custom in these times that if man and wife had failed to have a child for 2 years, and they'd been in Canaan 10 years, then it was acceptable at that time for a servant to be taken and to be given instead for a child to be had. So it looks to us kind of, why would you do that? But then it was a much more acceptable thing to do. But I wonder if you know what it's like to be Hagar, to be the one that is caught up in these circumstances, not of her making, and yet she's caught up in it. Wasn't her fault, and yet she seems to be the one that's carrying the can, taking the blame, the one that has to leave. So she runs away. What a mess. What a mess. And she runs away. She runs to the desert. And it doesn't say this in the scripture, but I wonder how hurt she felt. Rejected, victimized, used, upset at the loss of what was a privileged position in the household, upset at the loss of relationships. She was an Egyptian. It was probably as close to her family as she got in that land. And she's lost it all, and it wasn't her fault. What has she got left? She's got the child within her. Maybe she doesn't even really want the child. We find ourselves in these places, don't we? Sometimes because we have made the mistake and we are living in the consequences of that, and sometimes because others have made a mistake and we live in the consequences of that. And she finds herself in the desert. I wonder if she went there deliberately. Perhaps she thought that the best thing to do would be to curl up in the desert and die. She and her child. But then she's visited by an angel of the Lord. And in the Hebrew, that means a messenger of Yahweh. A messenger of Yahweh. And we could debate endlessly whether it was an angel, whether it was a manifestation of God's presence, whether it was a manifestation of Jesus' presence. Sometimes when the messenger of the Lord phrase is used, it can mean all of those. any one of those. And you have to look at the context to see which one it perhaps is. And it's not easy to tell from this one, because at times he's speaking as though he is God, and at times he's speaking as though on behalf of God. But it's not the time, is it, when you're visited by an angel of the Lord, to be doing an analysis of whether this is an angel or God or Jesus. It's not the time, is it? Not the moment. But what the angel of the Lord does is addresses Hagar by name. We've been singing and thinking and talking this morning, haven't we already, about the Lord who knows who we are and where we are. Addresses Hagar by name. Describes who she is and where she's come from. She's known to him. And he says, where have you come from? Where are you going? It's a good question, isn't it? A very good question. It's not the focus for today, but it is a question that you might want to ponder on at some stage. Where have you come from? And where are you going? And then the angel brings a prophecy about the child and names the child. Not the first time an angel has brought a name, is it? Ishmael, God who listens. God who listens. The content of the prophecy is bleak. If you read it, this child was going to be a donkey of a man. That's not very attractive, is it? He's going to be a man who falls out with everybody, and everybody falls out with him. But the impact on Hagar is profound. Not because of what she said about her child, but because of the revelation that Hagar has. She is an Egyptian slave girl. She would have heard of Yahweh, Jehovah, because that's who Abram and Sarai served. She would have been aware of them talking about him, maybe praying, how they worshipped. But she probably doesn't know him for herself. And now here is this God standing before her saying, I know who you are. I know you. And I know what's happening in your life. And suddenly she understands that God sees her. God sees her. Not only sees her, knows her, knew where to find her, cares enough to come to her when she is probably at the worst moment in her life. That's a revelation, isn't it? The God who sees. And such is the impact on her, she names him. That doesn't happen very often, does it? She gives him a name. El Roi. R-O-I. El Roi. The God who sees. And then she says, I have seen the one who sees me. Wow. It's like a veil has been lifted from her eyes, and she can see. And as I was thinking about this yesterday, do you know, it reminded me of being at my great niece's birthday party last week. She was 1, and she's learnt a new trick. She's learned how to play peekaboo at the age of 1. And she sat on her dad's lap. And her dad had a muslin, and he just dropped the muslin over her face. And she grabbed hold of the bottom of it, she pulled it down, and she went, ah! And he dropped the muslin over her face again. She pulled it down. Ah! It was like, I can't see you. There you are. And you know, that's what I think happened to Hagar. I can't see you. You're not there. Ah! There you are. And sometimes we play peekaboo with God, don't we? If I shut my eyes, God, you can't see me. How we kid ourselves. But Hagar wasn't playing. This was for real for her. Wow. God revealed himself to Hagar. He saw her. She saw him. He saw her situation, her distress. She saw his mercy. She saw his care. And then he said, go back. And she was obedient. So often we want to say to God, I'll be obedient. You bless me and I'll be obedient. And he says, you be obedient and I'll bless you. El Roi. It's the only time in Scripture that this name of God is used. And it's been used by an Egyptian slave girl. The truth is, we serve a God who sees us too. Knows where we are, knows the situations you're in, knows what you need, knows your heart cry. And he must grieve over the way that we run ahead of him sometimes, get ourselves into circumstances that we didn't see coming. And then we want him to come and rescue us and lift us out of those circumstances. And he says, I'll walk with you through them. So whatever your circumstances today, God sees you, he knows you, he loves you. He's there for you to call out to. He hears your heart cry. He comes. Sometimes he does lift us out of the situation. Sometimes we have to walk with him out. So listen. See what he has to say to you today.